Hey there, Facebook friends. Happy Monday. Hope everyone had a nice weekend. Once again, continued weird, strange spring weather. So I wanted to get outside this weekend. Didn't do too much of that. It's kind of cold and kind of blah, but that's okay. Still making the most of it. So would love to hear some check-ins from everybody once people start joining in. How was your weekend? What'd you do? What was the highlight of your weekend? Kind of wait a few moments for some people to join in. Hi, Kara. Hey, Jake and Sarah. Nice to have everybody on here. Hope everyone had a nice Mother's Day for those of you who celebrate. Sarah spent the whole weekend trying to remember what our homework was. That's funny. Yeah, the weekend seemed like it went by very fast, but then again, I feel like I've been saying that every day. Time, at least in my own little world, time feels like it's flying by very quickly. I feel like the sunshine is deceiving some days. Look outside, I'm like, oh my goodness, it's beautiful, and I check the weather and step outside and it's in the 30s. That's all right though. Spring is somewhat on its way, so warm weather eventually. So anyways, I hope everyone was hanging in there this weekend and made the most of it. So we are going to jump right back into the book I've been reading to you all. So Hopeful Healing by Mackenzie Phillips. And as usual, for those of you who are new, I'll give you a quick intro on the book. Some of you may have heard of Mackenzie Phillips. She's an actress. She used to do a bunch of soap operas back in the day. She's also the author of her best-selling memoir, High on Arrival. She is also the daughter of the founder of the 1960s band, the Mamas and the Papas. Mackenzie grew up in a dysfunctional environment and subsequently battled a near-fatal drug addiction. She is now a drug and alcohol counselor and outspoken advocate for addiction awareness and education. She gets real about the hard times of recovery, how to get through them, and the joy of experiencing life clean and sober. Hey, Nikki. Hey, Marilyn. Kara says, time is going so fast. It's really weird. Highlight was seeing my mom for a driveway drop-off of food and gifts. Oh, that's awesome. That's so cool. I'm sure she very much appreciated that. You know, it's so weird kind of doing these driveway visits every now and then, but you know what? It's still a way of connecting with people, and it's forcing us to all get a little creative, so it's not necessarily a bad thing, so that's awesome. So each one of these chapters in the book is its own little essay, kind of, on different aspects of addiction and recovery. Mackenzie says, in these essays, I've concentrated on the concepts and feelings that surround the recovery process rather than on the linear story of my life in recovery. I wanted to preserve the conversational foundation of these essays so that they would provide a genuine experience, and hopefully the person reading them would find a friend and some words that are helpful along their own journey. This is a wisdom-based book, not a clinical book. This is also a conversational book. While I do include some basic facts about substance use disorders, I make no claim to being an expert on all things addiction and recovery. I am, however, an expert in my own experiences of those two things. And it is in this that I have found the strongest connection with my clients at the recovery center where I work. So that's just to give you a little background. So what I've been doing is just kind of going through each chapter, and some of the chapters are kind of long, but kind of, oh my goodness, excuse me, not enough coffee yet today. Kind of pulling out, you know, the meat of each chapter a little bit, so kind of skipping around. So I'm really not reading in order. You'll kind of probably pick up on that, but just grabbing some really important pieces that I felt were important to share on each chapter. And as always, I encourage you all to just be, you know, mindful of, you know, the language that we use to tell our own stories. You know, I do read it exactly as Mackenzie has written each chapter. But even some of the language in there, you know, I encourage people to just kind of take that as they want in their own minds. And, you know, I always encourage people to kind of look at how you're telling your own story when you're kind of out and about, and be mindful of some of the language you're using. You know, there is a lot of terms and a lot of language surrounding addiction and recovery that do carry a lot of stigma and can sometimes give that a negative connotation. So just being mindful of that. So today's chapter is called 50 Years of Denial on Abuse and Trauma. And there's a quote here from Anonymous that says, "I wonder how much of what weighs me down isn't mine to carry." So again, I'm not really starting at the beginning, just kind of skipping around a little bit. In Mackenzie's memoir, High on Arrival, she really does go into more of her story there. But there are parts in this journal where she is bringing in her own bits and pieces from her own childhood, her own trauma that she went through, the childhood abuse that she has went through at a young age. So we will be getting into that a little bit today. So just be mindful if that, if that's coming up and as an issue, please feel free to reach out and talk to us, or, we're here to support you. But there was just some important things that were kind of linking trauma to addiction in here. And again, I'm just reading this as she has written it. I'm also not an expert on trauma, just on my own that I've been through. So we'll kind of get right into it. Again, I'm just kind of jumping around and pulling out bits and pieces. Mackenzie says, "What I've learned over time is that not addressing the trauma you've been exposed to and just addressing the addiction or whatever other toxic behavior we're trying to overcome keeps you from truly getting better. Honestly, I think that I stayed sober for those 10 years before I relapsed by force of will alone, because I certainly hadn't addressed my own childhood trauma in any effective way. And I know that I relapsed because I was still living with the pain it caused me. In my case, I had a childhood rife with traumas that rocked my worldview. One was neglect by my parents, and the other was being abused by a stranger as a teenager. Both caused profound pain that I sought to numb. For here and now, I'm going to be speaking primarily about my experience with neglect." So she does kind of go into that a little bit. Again, if you're interested in her story, I encourage you to check that out. It's called High on Arrival. It's her memoir, so I don't want to get too much into that. But there's a few parts in here that I felt were important. So Mackenzie says, "The deep work was hard and complex. The complex part doesn't go away either, especially if it's about your parents. To this day, I still don't know how to fully talk about my dad. It's tangled and complicated, and my feelings for him and the things that happened range across the spectrum of emotions. One week I might be okay with talking about it, and the next not so much. This stuff is complicated. It's work. God is at work sometimes. To find my center and ground myself in what I know is healthy. I know that all of my childhood and adult traumas live within me. Sometimes they're light, and sometimes they feel as heavy as a herd of elephants. And that's what it is, light and heavy, just that." And I think that's important to acknowledge too, that, some days, either way it takes work, right? But some days it's a little bit easier to ground ourselves from, all the things that we've been through in our history. And some days it's a lot heavier. And it's okay to experience that whole range of emotions, right? And just be gentle and kind with ourselves on those days where, when that trauma comes up or that our history comes up, if it is triggering and if it is, heavy on your heart that day, like it's okay to, feel the heaviness of that, and just know that it's not going to feel that way every single day. The bottom line is that when there is an underlying trauma that accompanies a substance use disorder, there is always additional work to be done. It goes like this. First, we aim for stabilization and creating a safe environment, and then we start looking at the underlying issues. Trauma, much like addiction, messes with the brain on a physiological level. It rewires shit up there and then reinforces it with a repeat and rinse cycle that is truly epic. Close your eyes and picture a country road with grass, trees, and wagon wheel tracks in the grass. For hundreds of years, wagon wheels went down the same track, and there are deep ruts in that beautiful country road. Can you see it? Those are the neural pathways that trauma has created in the brain. A traumatized person's brain is so tuned to those tracks that when it gets triggered or stimulated, it goes straight to the most embedded path, those rutted wagon wheel tracks. But there are billions of other connections our brain can make because we have something called psychoneuroplasticity, which is to say that our brains can reroute. But to do this, there needs to be a disruption. It's like a vinyl record that has a skip in it. We need to move the needle off the track. Trauma manifests differently for different people, so treatment will be different for different people. There are a variety of methods, and the method should be customized to match the needs of the individual. This is something that you and your counselor should discuss at great length. Whatever method is used, the main idea is to disrupt the trauma path in the brain and help it jump to another connection, to knock it off the groove in the record, allowing you to have other responses. Part of coping with trauma is a deep internalization of it. We may act it out in some way, shape, or form that is seeable by others, but it's like an iceberg. What you see above the surface is nothing compared to the beast floating underneath the surface. Deep trauma hollows you. It feels like some vital aspect of yourself, like marrow, has been pulled out, and you know you are fragile, broken, and wounded. You live waiting for the blow. It doesn't matter if it's emotional or physical, that will take you down. Maybe what we feel being pulled out is the one who we would have been self. It's missing, but felt like a phantom limb. Because childhood trauma, indeed any trauma, creates such havoc, we carry it with us for the rest of our lives. There is that before trauma you, and then there comes the after trauma you. It's marked on your life's map, a demarcation that shows a forced and unchosen change in your route. So she kind of goes on to talk a little bit, kind of working through some of that stuff. But I think this is important to note, this next piece here, where she says, first things first, because we're also talking about substance use here, you need to get stabilized and safe before you start tackling this stuff. This is because there is a strong chance that your addiction is triggered by the things that bring up the traumatic event for you. So I'm sure for a lot of people, myself included, there are those traumas that have happened early on in life, and so much of that is very much tied into the substance use, and those can one can kind of trigger the other back and forth, and that can be really difficult for a lot of people too. But I love that she says it's important to first get stabilized and safe before we start tackling the trauma stuff, and we can kind of relate that to anything in life, right? Like if I've got 20 different projects I need to work on, I can kind of, I can go the route where I'm trying to work on them all at once, and I don't have, focus for each one of those tasks. I'm kind of doing a half-assed job with each one of those tasks, and then I'm really not putting, 100% effort into 10 different tasks at a time, right? It's kind of all over the place, or I can kind of focus on first things first, focus on one task at a time, get stable with that, and then kind of move to the next one. If I'm focusing on just one thing at a time, I have more of that focus and that energy to just work on that one single thing. I can practice being present and mindful, working on that one simple thing. And that's kind of what she's talking about, for people who struggle with addiction or any of the things that people struggle with, really, any of the negative behavior. We have to get stabilized and safe first before we begin kind of diving into all that trauma. Let's see. She also talks about another thing to do is to tell somebody. A counselor or a therapist is recommended, but you can start with just sharing with a trusted friend. You don't have to go deep into it right away. Just start by sharing that you had a rough childhood or traumatic experience that you still carry with you. If you don't want to share it with someone else, then acknowledge it for yourself, with yourself. And that's so important too. We often talk about, we can look at it in any situation, especially things right now, right? Like it's so hard for us to really kind of go through life alone, right? We're not meant to be isolated and go through things alone. And I even believe that comes down to dealing with, our issues that we have to our trauma, our addictions, the things that we really struggle with in life. We're not meant to deal with those things alone. And for some of us, we've tried to deal with those things alone, and it just makes it so much harder. It's so important, especially at a time of right now, to just really reach out and to connect with other people and to have other people there to guide us, to support us, to kind of show us the way, especially if they've been down that path before, and kind of just lean on other people for support. And it's kind of like that with trauma too, but if we don't feel comfortable sharing that with anybody else, then at least acknowledge it for yourself, that this is hard, that I had a rough childhood, that I had this particular traumatic experience that I still carry with me, that I still carry those heavy feelings. We can acknowledge those things out loud to ourselves. And hopefully over time, we can start reaching out to other people that can really help us process through that. Otherwise, we're just carrying this really heavy, difficult, trauma triggering thing within inside of ourselves for all these years, right? She says the fourth thing is to let go of any shame and feelings of responsibility you might have. And that can be another hard one too, especially if, trauma has happened, at a young age and as kids, like it's just so important to, I think we naturally kind of carry that shame and guilt sometimes, but it's so important that we recognize that we're carrying that and to just do the best that we can to work through letting go of that. And again, I found that that's something that I was not able to do by myself. I need to kind of seek outside help to work through some of that stuff. Mackenzie also says, finally, let yourself feel the pain for what it is. Part of the reason the wound is still open is because you learned to hide it away instead of heal it. Case in point, historically, when I was sharing my trauma with a therapist back in the day, I was very blasé about it. I wasn't at all connected to it. It was like two separate versions of me. And the one talking would say very matter-of-factly, this happened, and that happened, and this happened, and that happened. But it was like I was talking about somebody else. I lived with my wound, bleeding all over the place while I told my story over and over again, and never actually did anything about it. It was just the telling of it. It became rote. I was so dissociated from the pain of it. I could talk about it, but I couldn't process it. It wasn't until after High on Arrival, her memoir, when it became so clear to me that there was some work to do, that I was actually able to connect to it instead of being dispassionately narrative about it. So it's kind of interesting too. Let yourself, feel through that pain, and that's a really difficult thing when we've been through something traumatic, when that comes up again, when the memory plays in our mind, that can be really challenging at times. It does. It naturally brings up a lot of pain and a lot of discomfort. But like I've realized, and again, I'm not up here as an expert on this. I can only share my own experience. But, for myself, like I eventually kind of had to do the same thing. I would be able to tell my story over and over until it kind of became this like automated, as she says, this rote response, really. It was just a story that I told over and over again, but I wasn't actually connecting anymore when I told it. You know what I mean? Like I'm just basically kind of reciting the story. And also kind of realizing the same thing for me. Like I realized that, there are certain things in my past that I was kind of dissociated from the pain of it. I would just talk about it as if I was sharing somebody else's story or a story that I had read, But she makes a very good point that it's so important to let ourselves feel the pain for what it is. And to remember too, if we are feeling that pain and if it's too much to handle alone, that's where we can rely on our support team. It's just so important to have that. So I kind of want to skip more toward this. Was actually one of the longer chapters. Actually, there's quite a bit about some of her story and her trauma in there. She goes into talking about doing group work. She said other things are super effective. One of those things is group work. Again, this is something to go over with your therapist or counselor. But she says groups can be a safe place to talk about how you've been processing your trauma. They allow you to see other people who are living with it too, people who you can listen to and learn from. Sometimes it's enough just to hear someone else articulate a feeling or way of thinking that you had never spoken out loud for yourself before. Things like that can be pretty profound. Finding the words to express not just the experience, but the feelings connected to your experience is empowering. Even more so is the realization that you don't have to keep the secret anymore. And I can speak from my own experience as well as that too. I've done a couple of different group therapies before, and there was something that was that was actually very effective for me. And that doesn't work for everybody. That's okay. That was just, her experience that she shares as a counselor, leading other groups. And it's also something, that I've experienced in my life that has worked for me. There is something that is very comforting about being in a group of people who have also been through trauma or been through addiction. Like we can relate on the feelings, maybe our stories look a little bit different, and that's okay, but we're all there kind of leaning on each other, right? Like they're just people we meet who just have had similar experiences. And, so when we talk about our struggles and our traumas, like, people are kind of nodding their heads and they understand it. And then there is just sense of peace and serenity that's like, oh, like I'm not alone, and there's comfort in that. And again, that's not for everybody, but, it's something that I've experienced in my own life. So towards the end, Mackenzie says, if you have experienced and are still experiencing the pain caused by abuse or trauma at any age, and you have that hollowed out feeling, that emptiness that we keep on trying to fill up, I would like you to change how you think about that hollowness. Flip the meaning on it and think about it in a different way. What if that hollowness is not about something that needs to be replaced? Think of a bird with its hollow bones and its surprising strengths and amazing abilities. The amazing endurance it has to fly great distances. The resilience it has that allows it to fall from a nest and still get back up. Think about how birds dive and rise back up, how they glide on secret airways. Birds have hollow bones so that they can fly. We can't put back what was taken. We'll never be the before the trauma person that we would have been. What's done is past, and that is unchangeable. What we can do is choose how we move forward. I say we should fly. And I just kind of love how she, turns that around. I'm a very visual person, so I love all the metaphors. Just the idea that birds have hollow bones so they can fly. And, realizing that, we don't always have to try and fill up that hollowness within us, but rather kind of take it in a different direction. So she always kind of leaves the end of her chapters kind of with a tie-in. She ties the whole chapter together, and then there's always an action piece that I've been reading to you all. So connecting all the pieces. One of the biggest things that happens with abuse or trauma is disassociation. We disconnect the emotions that we felt at the time of the trauma from the memory of the trauma. Unfortunately, it's hard to compartmentalize that coping mechanism. So we start to dissociate ourselves from any strong feelings and often our lives in general. One of the simplest things you can start to do is check in with yourself throughout the day and ask yourself, how am I feeling? The key here is not to be half-assed about it. Take a moment and really think about your feelings. If you have to, write down a list of emotions so that you can put a word to what you are feeling. It can be simple. It can be a simple list like sad, scared, panicked, angry, happy, joyful, calm. When we start connecting our emotions to ourselves again, we begin to make ourselves whole. And that's something I encourage, from all of you quite a bit is, to really grow that self-awareness, to really push yourself outside that comfort zone, and do these check-ins with yourself throughout the day. It can be, again, it's just another take home, and it's something that, really starts to grow that muscle of that self-awareness. Do these check-ins with yourself throughout the day. Do it multiple times a day. If you're somebody who might forget about it, maybe set an alarm. Check in the morning with yourself. How are you feeling when you wake up? Midday, before you go to bed. Like, how was your day today? What were some of the difficulties that you endured? What were some of the highlights of your day? How did you get through those difficult moments? What are some of the emotions you were feeling? Any kind of check-in with yourself is just important. It really just strengthens that self-awareness muscle. And this is kind of the take-home piece too. It works if you work it. Sometimes it's hard to start talking about your trauma to a counselor or a sponsor. If you are having difficulty opening up about your trauma, try writing down a simple statement. It can be as simple as, I was abused. Once you do, ask your sponsor if you can read what you wrote. This will help you open up the conversation that needs to follow. And she makes a good point. That is a very difficult thing is, to work for any of us, really, not even people in recovery, but, we all have a story, right? We all have difficult things that we've been through in life. And sometimes it's really just, it's so hard to open up about those things, especially if it's things that we tie shame and guilt into, right? That can be so challenging. But I love the idea of just starting simple. I think, at least in my own little world, I tend to overcomplicate quite a lot of things in my life. So it's so important, those, even when I hear simple suggestions like this, I'm like, oh, like, that's easy. Like, I can handle that small piece. So just starting with those simple statements of, whatever you went through, whatever those difficult times where you went through in your life, just starting by just writing down that simple, I was abused, or whatever it is that you've been through that's difficult to talk about, just starting with that one simple statement. And again, really encouraging, if there are really people that are struggling and, looking for help, it's okay to seek that outside help. It's okay to seek connection from us. It's also important and okay to seek, connection and advice from counselors and therapists, sponsors, if that's the path you choose to go down, more of a 12-step route. Whatever it is, it's just what's really more under that is it's important that we're building that support network, right? Like I have my support network, I have my family, I have my friends, and I can talk to them about a lot of different things in my life. But there are certain deep-rooted issues that, I need help working through. And some of those, like, I need the help of a professional, whether it's a therapist, or whether it's, like a sponsor who has been through a similar trauma. Whatever it is, we can have all these different avenues of different connections for our support team. And it's just so important to build that. None of us can do any of this alone. It's exhausting, and it's scary, and like, I don't know, like, I've tried to do a lot of things alone in my past, and it just has not worked out. But realizing today that it's okay to lean on my supports. It's okay to talk about the really difficult things. It's okay to talk about the really hard times that I've been through in my life with somebody else and process through it. That's kind of where the healing begins, is when I start to open up and lean on other people a little bit. I do want to check in with some comments here. Hey, Kirsten. Hey, Danny. Nikki's on here. So Nikki says, this reminds me of a saying I heard somewhere. It's just a bad day, not a bad life. Yeah, absolutely. And even challenging you to think like one step further than that. Is it really a bad day, or is it really just a bad few moments? Was it something ridiculous that triggers you or set you off, or something somebody said? Was it just a few bad moments? Do we have to let it ruin our whole day? Right? So kind of, again, really building that self-awareness and doing those check-ins with yourself. Good point. Jake says, I can relate to this so much. Personally, coping skills are definitely important, but it's something that I can't just rely on solely. They only scratch the surface. I have to dive deep and really get down to the heart of the matter. What is my purpose in life? And am I living it? I have to deal with the past traumas and learn how to deal with it today. Being realistic with what's really going on and not letting the past trauma rule the day. My poor decisions of trying to fill the void inside me with alcohol or fill in the blank is directly correlated with my mental, emotional, and spiritual health. For me, it comes down to self-love as a whole, because then I can really be the best me that I can be. I love that. There's a lot of good stuff in there. Thank you, Jake, for sharing that. Yeah, you're right. Those coping skills are something that we can learn. And we can learn and practice them all day long, but you're right. It gets to a point where that is only scratching the surface, but you're right. We have to kind of dive deep and get to the heart of, the things that we've struggled with in our past and really work through those. We can't leave them swept under the rug, because what happens is they start to build up, and they really just start to create this like whirlwind of negative emotions inside. And sometimes they just come up and come out at the wrong times. So it's really important to deal through that, as difficult as it is. But again, that's why we have other people and we reach out, so that we can deal with those traumas with the help of others, right? With the help of others to guide us. But you're right, Jake. I have to deal with the past traumas and learn how to deal with it today. Yeah. And it's very different, right? Like who I was, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago is very different than who I am today. So the way I deal with things today is differently. But for me, like, I still need to work through those things. I still need my support team. I still need to be able to process some of the really difficult things that happen in my life. Just because I've processed through it once doesn't mean it's gone away and it's fixed. But that can be different for everybody. Nikki says, thank you for doing these lives. They definitely help me recenter every day. And that's awesome, Nikki. I'm so glad to hear that. I'm so grateful that all of you are joining me here today and, really connecting and being vulnerable and sharing your experience and your strength and your hope too. I love that. It also encourages me. Again, I'm not up here as an expert on anything other than, my own life journey that I've been through thus far, but it's so helpful and wonderful just to hear everyone else share and really open up. Jonathan, miss you too. That's not a 3-foot hat. Oh goodness, you guys make me laugh. But yeah, again, I really appreciate everybody just showing up and taking a little time to reflect on some of the more difficult things throughout your day. And that is hard, right? But it's important. It's important for us to work through the difficult things, but also remembering that we don't have to do it alone. So if anybody out there is needing connection, needing somebody to talk to, wanting somebody else to kind of, walk alongside you in your journey, we're here for you. As Rock Recovery, we're still offering our peer mentor services. So please reach out to us. Don't hesitate. All the information to contact us is in the above description of the video. Our email is on there. You can Facebook message us, or you can call our peer hotline. It's 585-622-4975. So we hope to hear from you. Again, we're here to connect with you all. So if you did come to this video late, or you missed it, or you missed any of the other ones, the good news is that they all save. So you can go back to our Recovery Fitness Facebook page and check out all the past videos that all of our other wonderful recovery crew has been putting out, some great content for you, and just really trying to connect with you at home too. So thank you all for always tuning in and just being here and showing up. It really means a lot to me, and I'm so glad we get to connect every day. So I encourage you to check out some of the other videos we're offering. And again, you can find those all on our Facebook page. We also have our YouTube channel, so the link for that is also posted in the description. So please check those videos out. Maybe find some old ones, share them with some people, some good stuff on there. So I hope you all have a fabulous day. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you all tomorrow. Bye.